Hello, Maggie. Welcome to Mentally a Badass. I'm so happy to have you on today.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here.
Of course. So today is going to be we're going to be talking about self-harm. I'm excited to, get into it. Well, you told me that you used to cut yourself at Disney. When you were talking about that, I was like, "Oh, I used to work at Disney too." I should totally have you on because we can totally have some things to talk about and relate to each other. I like how you had in your bio saying you can still be depressed, even working at the happiest place on earth. And when I saw that, I was like, yes, yes,
Yeah.
we are talking about that because I can say a lot about that. A lot of people have this like misconception that we have like the perfect life and we're all happy and golly gee, but in reality, we're like dying on the inside.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I used to work, at Imagineering, and I still work for them on occasion, but, as a freelancer, but what's interesting is that we're all human. We all struggle. Nobody is free of having to deal with depression or downs in life, and I really struggled with self-harming for many, many years, and, there were times in my early 20s when I would have to do that at Disney while I was working just to get through the day. I don't do that anymore, and my work now is focused on helping other people who struggle and the people who care about them, the clinicians who work for them. But that was a real thing, like being at the happiest place on earth where everyone wanted to work and just feeling like I was dying inside.
So, can you explain like what exactly led you to self-harming? Like, do you have any stories that you're allowed to discuss?
Yeah, I've studied self-harming. I started when I was 4, and I'm a lot older than you are. So this was 1971. And in my case, there was a lot of abuse, sexual abuse and things, and that's often a precursor, but not always. And that's a misconception about it, is that it's always tied to sexual abuse. It was in my case, and I didn't know that until much later, but it was how I coped with things. It's how I coped with not having control over my life. And it was actually soothing. And if you talk to people who do self harm, they don't do it because it's a suicidal gesture or to get attention. They keep it secret because it's soothing. It's an interesting, I think, very creative way of approaching dealing with overwhelming trauma and feelings.
Yeah, I definitely relate because I used to self-harm myself. And a lot of people would look at it and be like, oh, she's just looking for attention. And like, that's people would say. So I self-harm from like eighth grade up until like early senior year.
Mm,
And I like relapsed a little bit in college when I was under a lot of emotion, which actually no one
uh-huh.
really knows about that, but they're gonna find out that at that now. Yeah, so I used to do that as well. And I understand the soothing aspect of it because when you're in so much pain, you rather feel physical pain.
Yeah. It's a
Yeah.
relief. Actually a release. It just feels like the adrenaline, the blood flow, everything just feels like, okay, I'm in control. This is no longer overwhelming to me. And I'm so sorry you struggle with that. And I'm that it makes sense that you're doing this podcast. It's the best way, I think, to keep your head above water is to help other people. That's what I've learned through this whole thing. But I started in my with just harming myself in various unorganized ways, and I switched to razor blades at 12, which was 7th grade for me, and I struggled off and on. I went to therapy. I tried a bunch of different things. I went into athletics. I used my artwork to try and express what was going on inside me. I struggled through my mid 20s, and then I went through many years of abstinence, I guess you could say. I put it away, I locked it away, I avoided all triggers, I changed my life, and I managed about 14 years, I think, without any cutting or any urges. And then when I went through a divorce of my 20-year relationship, as we started to have troubles, I relapsed. And it felt like that. Felt like I was 15 again. And what the heck is wrong with me? And there's nothing out there for people in their mid 50s. It was all geared towards young women. And I found out that just as many men, almost as many men struggle with it as women, all ages. I found places online. This was early on in online communities, and there were grandmothers who were struggling with it, men. And when I was trying to get help, I found a great therapist, which is amazing, but there was no literature about it. All of the literature was either by clinicians who had studied people, and I always felt like, a bug under a light with that, or under a microscope. Or there are these like harrowing memoirs written by people who'd gone through it, and I didn't want to feel triggered. So I wrote the book that I wanted to read, which was The Creator's Guide to Stopping Self-Harm, which is using artwork in addition to therapy and creative exercises to redirect that voice on the skin, because I see cutting now as a voice on the skin, something we're trying to express that has no other way to come out.
Yeah, and something that you said when you said a grandmother, someone at that, that age, before I started talking to you, I never really thought of people in that age group self-harming, because normally when people think of self-harming, they think it's like a teenager in high school or a person in middle school. And I didn't even think of someone who's in like 4 years old. And another thing too is that I would like to say, something that I'm not gonna say, there's those feelings where when you're doing that, it feels like you're scared to like talk about it. Now I'm not, because I've had all this like conversations with mental health, and I was actually able to post a reel where I basically took a skeleton out of the closet
Hmm.
and basically saying like, it was talking about relationships, and relationships is like my biggest trigger. Like, I think it's kind of abandonment issues. So when I was in 8th grade, I had my first boyfriend, and we didn't date long. It was like a couple of weeks, but it was my first. And it was finally like that moment where someone finally liked me. And then he left me, and like, he wanted to date my friends or whatever. And then he told
Hmm.
people I was like a bad kisser when it was like my first kiss too.
Hmm.
So anyway, so I went into like a whole spiral, like having a mental breakdown, crying, and I literally had a stapler and I like smashed it into my head.
Hmm.
And I
Ouch.
think about that, at first, during my whole life, I never really told anybody about that because I didn't want people to think I'm crazy. Like, oh my God, you smashed a stapler into your head. And, people would think, like, oh my God, what is wrong with her? But then when we're talking about it, it's because I was probably feeling so much emotion where I was overwhelming and I couldn't control it anymore. So I needed something to release it. And that was like the nearest thing was a stapler. I mean, honestly, thank God it wasn't like a knife, like a gun. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
That's like
Yeah,
another
yeah.
reason
There's a case
too.
for not having guns in the house.
Yeah, I don't allow guns in like where I like anywhere in the household. Like my boyfriend used to have a gun before we started dating, and I told him he had to get rid of it if he wants to date me, because like even if he has it locked up, like I don't trust myself. Like what if I'm in the middle of an episode and
Right.
I have bipolar, so I'm medicated now, I'm stable, but like God forbid, I shouldn't have access to like guns,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's so going back to what you were saying, like that's like it's definitely like a misconception that thinking that it's only teenagers. So I'm happy that you share that, because that's definitely something that people can be aware of, and learn about that. So let's talk about. I want to talk about your artwork. Can you explain how it's a great way to like release versus like doing that to cope instead of self harming?
Yeah, and it ties into what you were talking about, that overwhelming feeling when your system is flooded and you can't handle it. I think that's why a lot of teenagers do it, because we're so young and we don't know yet how to manage all those big emotions. So
Hmm.
it does get overwhelming. And so what creativity does, what artwork, writing, art making does, is it actually gives you a new way to express something, because it's a nonverbal thing. It's a suffering that's being expressed. Animals do it. Animals, if they are caught in unbearable situations in labs, for instance, primates will self harm. They'll bang their heads, they'll chew off fingers or limbs. Dogs will do it in lab situations. So it's not limited to humans. It's not limited, as I said, to teenagers. 5% of adults do it. And that's based on the National Health, I don't remember the name of the acronym, but it's based on actual studies of self-reported. So it's most likely underreported, because that's just people who are answered the survey. 35% of men. It's around many different countries, not just the US. And 1.3% of kids below 12 do it as well. And I was, I guess, in the top 1%. Yay. Artwork is so great, because even if you're not an artist, if you can draw a stick figure of that's saying something, you draw a little stick figure and a dialogue bubble, and then you put those words in. What is it that cutter, that being inside you, is trying to express? And when I did it, and when I've worked with a couple other people just informally, there's always some version of the message of help. Someone help me. Just putting it onto paper, giving that really a child part of us expression relieves it quite a bit. I don't ever recommend that people do this without a therapist's help because there's so many layers there, but expressing through art is such an important part of any recovery.
Yeah, yeah, and there's also, of course, different other ways of doing art. Like I listen to like music is so relieving and poems.
Yeah.
Poems. When I was 13, I would write poems. I wish I still did. Realized like lately, like the past year, was do you think that people who like drink alcohol or like do drugs or this like do you see as like a form of self-harm like in this like in disguise?
Yeah, most of the time. I mean, it's a complicated issue. I've actually also been clean and sober for 32 years. I stopped drinking at 24. I hit my bottom, and that was really the beginning of my recovery. It's a foundational thing for me, but I used drugs as a self-abuse, self-poisoning thing. That's at 12 I started swallowing handfuls of Tylenol codeine, which I'd been prescribed for bronchitis. I started drinking it. And so I really drank not for the fun of it so much as just harming myself. But there is that unconscious thing of pushing the edge, of hurting our bodies, doing things we know aren't great for us. And in 12-step programs, they really focus on one addiction at a time, and that's the source of the problem. But for me, the source of the problem was much deeper. It was, the way I put it is, the wound holds the answer. Whatever it is inside of us that's causing this unhappy behavior, these symptoms of unhappiness, of incompleteness, that's what needs to be addressed at the root of it. And you talked about having bipolar and you're on medication. Now, there's always this element of agency and choice. Like you can choose to dissolve into the illness and let go into it, or you can choose to take the medications and take care of yourself. And so much of this process of recovery is gaining that agency back and learning to face these parts of us that are unbearable and listen to what the voices are trying to say, the voice on the skin or the self-destructive voice. What is it they need from us? Do our own reparenting and our own good choices, and then we start to become whole over time.
Yeah. I was to discuss about reparenting. I really like that. I like to like dive into that. During your childhood, because I really like talking about like childhood trauma,
Hmm.
especially in this like podcast. When you were self-harming, did you have support from your family? I
I
mean
did
like
not.
support as in like not like supporting your self-harm,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
like that's really how that sounded.
No, I didn't. That's actually part of the struggle. Was I felt so invisible. There was, my favorite story growing up was illustrated by Maurice Sendak, called The Shrinking of Treehorn. I'm sorry, illustrated by Gory. And Treehorn is this little kid who gets this game in the mail and starts playing it, and it's boring, so it's a shrink and grow game, and he leaves his little play thing on the shrink square and puts it under the bed. And the next day he wakes up and he's a little shorter and nobody notices. His mother keeps telling him to sit up, and his teacher sends him to kindergarten. And it isn't until he remembers, he keeps getting smaller and smaller every day. And then finally he remembers this game and he pulls it out and he finishes playing it. And then he wakes up the next day, he's the right size. And that was like the story of my life. I felt like I was invisible. When I
Mm-hmm.
was a teenager, I used to reach across the dinner table with this wound on my arm and to grab the mashed potatoes or whatever. No one would say anything. My mom, dad, brother, they were so consumed in their own worlds. Even when I was 4 and told my mom I had scraped my arm with a safety pin, she just sort of spaced out, and I don't even know what happened. I was so young, but there was no validation that I even existed. There was, as I said, there was abuse. My mom was not noticing what was happening with my dad, despite the obvious signs. It was happening to both me and my brother. So it was a pretty extreme case. But at the same time, everyone was pretending that everything was fine. We lived in this beautiful town in central Ohio where my parents were professors at the college there. As far as anyone knew, we were great. I mean, everyone knew my dad drank, but there was no knowledge of any abuse. Our friends knew, my brother and my friends had an idea, but none of the adults did anything until finally I was on the swim team, and at 17, one of the other swim team parents took my mom aside and said, "Look at your daughter's arms. You have to do something about this." And she was not able to do anything other than to ask me if I needed stitches. But at the same time, she had been able to get me into therapy at 14. There's a local sliding scale counseling clinic, and that really helped me. And over the years, I've come to understand that they did their best. And I got those gifts like therapy that saved my life. But at the time, it was pretty traumatic because nobody was helping me. And this was long before mandated reporting of any kind. No one even knew when I told my therapist at 14 I was cutting my forehead. She didn't know what to do. She had to told me later she had to consult her supervisor. She was a therapist in training. So this was 1981 when I told her, and PTSD had only just entered the DSM, the Diagnostical Statistical Training Manual, in 1979. So nobody knew about cutting. It's still not listed as a disorder. It's listed as a symptom, NSSI, non-suicidal self-injury, requiring further study. People don't know what it is or how to deal with it.
Yeah. And also, this happened during a time where mental health wasn't as spoken about. Yeah, and that was a time where my mother, she has like her mental health problem. She would tell me
Mm-hmm.
that you were seen but not heard. There was like a certain saying, you
Yeah.
know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm. Seen but not
Yeah.
heard. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And so I'm like, in my head, I'm like, why? I guess me as like a millennial, like
Mm-hmm.
borderline Gen Z, because I'm born 95, so it's kind of like the cutoff is kind of awkward.
Yeah, you're right on the
So
cusp.
yeah, yeah. So I'm like, I'm young enough, not sorry, I'm old enough to remember like time before like social media like this, but then young enough to think like the way I think like a Gen Zer. So as I was saying, like with her saying that after, especially after everything I know of mental health and what I do every day, it just blows my mind. Like I'm like, that's so mean. Like I don't understand like why. It's basically saying like, oh, cry in a corner. I don't care.
Yeah.
And it's just, but you know, another thing too is that I'm going to tell you that I'm not really fond of myself, but I'm just going to bring it up just because, just I guess to put it in perspective, because remember I told you that I thought in my head, how can someone be mean like that, right? But then Facebook memories, how you can see stuff that you post from like years back, right? I would look at that every day because I'm just curious. And
Mm-hmm.
15 years ago, I would post things like, why is everyone talking about their problems on Facebook? Like no one like I was literally saying things like that. And I personally like don't remember, but like obviously it happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I like screenshot it and then sent it to my like the girl who I do mentally badass with. And I was like, this didn't age well.
Yeah, don't you wish you could share that with all young people who are starting out on social media? Like, be careful about what you post. It might haunt you one day.
I know, right? Yeah, but it's just that's also just another thing, and maybe I should do a reel about it because it just shows how much your brain changes through experiences. So
Right.
probably, I posted stuff like that when I was like 14, 15 years old in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, I had my mental health problems, but I was surrounded by people who were like, just get over it.
Yeah.
Like I was brought up in an environment, I was brought up in New Jersey right by New York.
Mm-hmm.
So the culture there is like hostile, hustle. We don't want to hear about your feelings. Like,
Right. Be
you
tough.
know, exactly, and I'm like not that kind of person. Hence the reason I moved to Florida. We're more slow paced here, more like, depends where you are in Florida, of course.
Right. Right.
But yeah, it's just like there's like hustle culture there and being hostile. So being brought up in that environment makes sense why I would think like that and why I would get annoyed and but it's so crazy because then like years later I'm like I would post things like complaining about things like, oh, my mom grounded me, like I hate my mom, like,
Yeah.
and it's crazy looking at that as like an adult. I'm like, man, I
I'm
was
so
such a
glad we didn't have social media when I was a teenager. It'd be really
yes.
embarrassing. Yeah.
I kind of think of because right now I'm 29 and on social media, I I don't rant like I used to. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
still post things like okay, it's not ranting, but it's more like productive. Like if you look at the Instagram, my Instagram, the mentally baddest Instagram, we have reels that would like Actually, there's not really ranting. It's more just kind of like, I guess, thinking it's kind of like negative towards people who are mean to people who have mental health problems. But it's
Mm.
not meant to be mean. It's meant to just be like, I don't under like it just thinks that people would treat people like that. It would make sense once you see it. Like it's nothing like mean
You're
or
being mean
inappropriate.
about mean people. You're raving. I'm gonna get share a quote with you that has really helped me whenever I encounter people who upset me like that, which
Okay.
is that be kind because everyone is fighting a great battle.
Yeah.
And once you've been around on the planet for a while and you've made a lot of mistakes, then you learn most from the most painful mistakes, like sending the text to the wrong person it wasn't intended for, or saying something online that you really regret, or hurting someone's feelings, or letting a secret out of the box, or you just realize that we're human. We all
Yeah.
have we change, things upset us. Most of us are projecting everything that
Hmm.
upsets us out into the world and then blaming other people for it. So it's really hard, really more important than ever to work on our own mental health and understand why we're doing the things we are.
Yeah. And it's also the way we look at things. So as you saw, I was having like a moment where I was like, oh my God, I don't want to seem like I'm a horrible person. Like I'm trying to like figure out how to explain this to her while not being
Hmm.
like, oh yeah, I'm talking shit. You know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
cause you don't know me that well. Like, I mean, we just met each other like what, 30 minutes ago?
Right, right.
So I'm just like, oh my God, I don't want her to think I'm like a bad person. And but then I realized that if I'm getting anxious about that and
Hmm.
freaking out about that, it means I'm not a bad person. You know what I mean? Because if I feel
Yeah, because
like,
you care. You're not a sociopath. I think you're right all the time.
yeah, exactly. And yeah, so also just so big about making sure I don't come off like that.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I'm like really huge on self-awareness and then I get like frustrated myself if I like don't know how to say something. But I think that comes from like people have like attacked me if I didn't say things the right way, even
Mm.
if I don't mean to. And I still today don't really understand what I said. Like a certain situation with like an old roommate in college, I she was using like my kitchenware and I told her I was like, "Hey, like I totally don't mind if you use like my kitchenware, but can you just like ask in the future?" And she attacked me. And I was like, did I say this wrong?
Mm.
So it kind of gets
Yeah.
me thinking. I'm like, if I really thought my words and then I get attacked like that, I'm like,
Hmm.
it makes me anxious. Like, okay, how do I say this? Or
Hmm.
am I going to get attacked again?
Right.
Today I was listening to an audiobook and it said that whatever you love about somebody, you love about yourself. Whatever you hate about somebody, you subconsciously hate about yourself.
That is a good perspective. As I said, I think we all project our own internal world onto the world outside us, and we think that that's what's reality.
Hmm.
And it's much easier to do when we're in trauma and in suffering, because then it's like when you have physical pain. If you've ever had food poisoning or a really bad wound, and it's like that's all you can think about. And that's the same as when we have psychic wounds, when we're in pain mentally and emotionally. That's really all we can think about. So our world becomes about us and what we're feeling and what people are doing to us and how we're experiencing the world through this lens of pain. And
Hmm.
as we heal, this is what I found when I healed from my journey and I use therapy and creativity in the 12 steps to find that healing place inside and to start that process and to really become a whole person, not just not cutting, but loving myself and understanding a lot more about human relationships. Once I did that, I naturally wanted to felt love for other people. So
Hmm.
you're right. Loving myself was the natural route to caring more about others, as opposed to trying to force myself to care when I really didn't, when I was just focusing on my own pain.
Yeah, yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense is that you can give more love and caring to people once you've did that to yourself. And I love talking about how moments where you do have to put yourself first because a lot of people would think, "Oh, that's so selfish that you're just thinking about yourself," but it's not.
Mm.
And I always talk about how you're taking care of your brain is so important in what's going on the inside because if your inside is like chaotic, your life is going to be chaotic. And so, there's the way I think about it when it comes to like my priority in
Hmm.
life is I come first when it comes to just taking care of myself, right? The only time that rule gets overwritten over, right, is that
Hmm.
if I have like a friend that's in like in
In
danger.
Christ.
Yes, like I've had a friend before that wanted me to come over because she was being like she was suicidal. Yeah, in that
Mhm.
case, I'm going to override that and
Right.
go and be there for her, right? But if it's nothing that's like urgent, I have to make sure I'm good with myself. And then
Right.
once you're good yourself, then you have the energy and love to give with then your immediate people in your life, right?
Right, and
And then
what
you
that usually
build that.
looks like is a daily routine of self-care, because it has to be every day. I mean, you can't, like, say, "Oh, my friend's suicidal, I gotta go over." Well, first I gotta take care of myself and build up my reserves. You know, it has to be there on a
Yeah,
daily
that's
basis because you've been putting gas in the tank every day.
yeah, yeah. And then if I were to be like that, then I'll be questioning my if I'm a good person or not. You know, like honestly, there's been multiple times where I've had friends call me up and I'll be like, yeah, like one was like 2 in the morning. It's like I don't care. I'm gonna jump in the car and be there because, I think another thing I do that is that I've been there. I've been there and I've always wanted people to, we always have these things in our brain like, oh, I want someone to save me, even though in reality, what they say is your older self saved you. But it means the world when you see someone go out of their way to help you, to take care of you. Like that's the greatest thing, like the
Yeah.
greatest gift. So yeah, so that's the only reason I'll override that.
Mm.
And then it's like, yeah, then the next priority is like your immediate circle, like your friends, your family, like you want to make sure they're good, right? And then after that, then I'll put like my energy into like society problems. You know what I mean? Like certain
Right,
things
that's
that's
where it
going
has
on
to
in this
start with
world.
start with ourselves and our loved
Hmm.
ones, and then we can put our energy towards, easier big picture things. And then the
Yeah.
hardest part is having compassion for people we disagree with, which is, since social media has been a harder thing for people to master, but and use that's reflected in today's political environment. But having compassion and kindness for those on the opposite side of the aisle, whatever that is, that's a big part of it too.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like if people kind of do things opposite, let's say they're like really angry and hurting on the inside. And a lot of that is being caused by, I mean, a lot of it obviously is internal and trauma and such, but also it's easier to get triggered from external. So, like, I don't know, like war this or that. They feel this anger. And like when you were saying the political stuff, I mean, God, I hate politics, but it's to prove a point, you're right. You prove a point, you're right. Like there's a lot of things that I'm not happy about, that's going on in our society. But I feel like people can get even more angry about
Yeah.
it when they're still just like they're looking through these lens. And even though all this stuff, like I mean, I always try my best to refrain from political talk. I never know what your side is, but I think just overall we could hopefully agree together that just equality and human decency and stuff like
Mhm.
that. But like, these things are obviously very important, but I've been noticing the type of anger towards it. And I feel like, it's important to be focused and to help and such, but then I noticed that when people get so much more angry, it kind of clouds their judgment.
Right, which seems to
Yeah.
be happening a lot lately, which again brings me back to what you're doing, which is educating people on how to manage their emotions and their what's going on between their ears. That's really, I mean, don't you wish there were classes for young kids starting in junior high, 12, 13 years old, how to manage your emotions, how to express them, how
Hmm.
to learn appropriate communication, all those things, have personal responsibility.
Yeah.
Those are crucial life skills that aren't taught in schools. They should be, but
Yeah, you think they would be. And I think it comes from a lack of understanding. They don't want to teach something they don't know.
right.
And actually, Selena Gomez is trying to create like a mandatory curriculum in the schools to have mental health classes.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, I don't know how that's going. I know that that's something in the process, something as a goal for her because mental health is very important to her.
Mhm.
And I know she has like her a funding for mental health through her like beauty brand and such. So she does talk about it. And so I really hope that it actually happens because imagine how amazing our society would be once if we can start from the beginning of learning how to manage our emotions and learning how to be kind because at the end of the day, like the first place that people learn how to be like children learn how to behave is within the home. And a lot of people who don't go through like self-healing or reparenting, they just they do what they think what they know to their children, and then it's just like a cycle, you
Yeah.
know?
Right, gets repeated and projected out into society and reaffirmed in school years, and it's just that's a mess. That's how people turn into the adults that are causing problems.
Yeah.
You mentioned having someone teaching courses on mental health, and I actually my teacher in high school, I saved my life, Mrs. Wren. She passed away in 2017 because I stayed in touch with her until she died. But she went out of her way to help me because I was a good student and I was just failing, and people could see what was happening with my family. My father's drinking, my mother's kind of falling apart, and so she took me under her wing. I attempted suicide, and that the next day she came in and she said in the hospital and said, "Young lady, you're going to let those walls down and let me in." And I just sat up in bed and opened my arms and I said, "Here, help me." And she took care of me. She and her husband would come to on snow days, would drive to the end of our driveway and pick me up, and she would take my calls when I was depressed and wanted to cut myself or kill myself. And she said, "Maggie, one day you're going to look back and you're going to be so grateful you didn't succeed in killing yourself." And she was right. And I called
Yeah.
her every year for years to tell her that. She had me come back and do a talk in my hometown to raise money for a local domestic abuse shelter. And I shared about all that. But she told me that after I graduated, I inspired her to start a program in our high school for psychology and mental health, and teaching kids how to manage emotions and learn about psychology. So I'm so glad I was able to inspire that through my suffering, but I think it's just an important thing to do to help people manage their own interiors.
Yeah. And I actually had a experience not fully similar to yours, but I had a teacher in high school too that pretty much saved my life as well.
Good.
I never really got too deep with him, but there is something he told me that stuck with me. And what he told me was, "Justine, you're in a fishbowl." And I was like, "What?" He's like, "You're in a fishbowl right now, which is high school. Once you graduate, you're going to be sent off to the ocean, and everything that's happening right now is not going to matter."
That's
And he
great.
was
Great
right.
advice. Yeah.
Right? Exactly. And I always live by, I always think about that. And so, and I think about it. I did go, I left my hometown, right?
Good for
Because
you.
yeah. So I left New Jersey and I moved to Florida, and Disney was actually what brought me here.
So you worked in the
Yeah.
parks?
I worked a couple of different jobs. I got in through the Disney College program. And so in 2016, then I worked in as a vacation planner, which is really like the tickets sales and such
Mhm.
in Hollywood
Mhm.
studios. And then from there, I had to go back to college for one more semester because I had like one more, and I was like, I'm not gonna drop out of college.
Right.
And I remember that semester, I was so depressed, and that was actually that same time for my relapse.
Hmm.
And I think, and actually, that actually happened when I was like drinking too, so that didn't really help.
Right.
Yeah, it was like right after like a party. Yeah,
Funny how
no.
they go together.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I try not to drink like tequila or because then it's all my like emotional like intelligence just being stable just kind of goes out the window. Um, so anyway, sometimes I kind of go off topic because my ADHD just then kicks
Mhm.
in. So I like always need to make sure I go back to what I was
You're talking
trying
about
to say.
Disney.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. And then, so then I went back, did the college program again, and I worked at Test Track. And working there really tested me.
Hmm.
If I get,
Yeah,
yeah,
really
working in attractions really tests you. And it wasn't
Yeah.
good because I was like, literally after my shift, I'd be like, "Oh, time to go to Walgreens to get a bottle of wine." Like I was literally drinking to get through it.
Yeah.
And that was also a time in my life where I was so skinny that I
Mm.
looked like I was like bone. And I was like
You
so
weren't taking care of yourself.
I
Yeah.
was trying. I was trying so hard. I'm just like, I was starting to get underweight. Like basically, I was like 1 pound for being underweight. And I was doing YouTube then, so I would look at these videos, like a video from like a year ago and a video now, and I'm just like, I look so nourished, and I'm just like, what is wrong? I'm like, oh my god. And
Yeah.
then I was like, I'm eating, but I'm like, I know my schedule's a little crazy, but like I even had to order like certain food that's already like prepared just so I make sure I eat. But it could have also been the stress. Stress really taking a toll on
And
my
you're
body.
young and no one taught you to take care of yourself in that way. It's like when you're
Yeah.
this little fish thrown into the big sea. No one says, now part of being an adult is you take care of your body, you take care of your mind, you
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
drink too much, you brush your teeth, you take
right.
care of your
And it was
emotions.
Yeah, and it was also like the first time, being on my own as well. I mean, obviously I had roommates, but like I literally left my life in New Jersey to move to Florida. So, but yeah, but Touch Track did a huge toll on me as well, like mental health wise. I think for everybody who worked there, like we all had our fair share of mental breakdowns in the break room. Like
Interesting.
one person actually punched a hole in the wall
Hmm.
in the break room.
Wow. So the cast members were having meltdowns behind the
All of
scenes.
us. It was just a norm. It was just a norm. Yeah.
Oh, that's
Because
interesting. Do you think
no,
it's because of the pressure of having to be on for so many hours, or what was the deal?
I mean, I'm sure that was part of it naturally with the pressure, but also the guests are just mean.
Hmm.
They test you. They do things where it's just like, is this person really talking about me? Like you think it's a joke, but it's really
Hmm.
not.
Hmm.
So yeah, and then also like, yeah, so I was there for like 4 months because it was, the program, but my friend is currently still in attractions. And the stuff that she's gotten is just way worse. Like she's even gotten like a guest even like pushed her to the wall because she didn't let them do the fast pass line. Like people would get so angry
Hmm.
over a fast pass. Like I've had these guys like gang up on me, like threatening to like pretty much punch me in the face, and I was like, "Go ahead." Yeah, no,
Yeah,
they're.
When Walt Disney conceived of these parks, I don't think he any understanding of how society would trend over time, and
Hmm.
it's kind of scary now. I mean, I never worked in the attractions end. I designed the theme park, so I was on the group of
Yeah,
people who were designing them. Like I
I
worked
want
on
to.
Animal Kingdom for 2 years
That's so
from its
cool.
beginning team. And I designed a land called Beastly Kingdom, which was eventually cut, but it was the fantasy animals of Disney. So dragons, unicorns, Fantasia, Pegasus animals. So Dino Land stayed, and now that's where the Avatar attraction is. But I
Yeah.
worked with people. That was a lot of fun. But even at that, I mean, we were very different from the Disneyland and Disney World attractions crew. We were the designers, so we thought of ourselves as maybe different, detached from that. But there was still that atmosphere of you got to be happy, you got to be on, you got to represent Disney wherever you go. It's a family company, it's this and that.
Hmm.
Um, every I love Disney. I love the people at Disney. Let's put it that way, because every company is made up of people, and the people I've
Hmm.
worked with in Imagineering are amazing. And I'm sure the people who work in attractions are amazing. But this culture of it has to be this way and no other way, I think can become toxic after a while because
Yeah.
I mean, even Walt Disney, every group, there's so many groups that were barred from entry when Disneyland opened in 1955. Every group has had to sue to be able to get in. Blacks were not allowed in. Jews with yarmulkes were not allowed in 1955. Gay people were not allowed to dance together. So that, there are all these groups. And it's kind of ironic now because it's such a diverse company, not as diverse as it could be, but a lot more so, especially among all those groups that had to sue to get in. And but that happiest place on earth is sort of like this American ideal of being happy is built into our Declaration of Independence. We have the
Hmm.
right to pursue happiness, and if you're unhappy or you're struggling, where do you fit in all of that
Yeah.
idealism?
Yeah. No, that's true. There's no like land where it's like this is
Depression
like
land, navigate the suicide roller coaster.
that would be so funny.
You go through the
I go to that theme
self-harming dark
park.
ride.
You should totally design that.
Oh God, believe me, I've brainstormed all those strange things.
Oh my
Brainstorming
god.
sessions are particularly fun because you're like throwing out ideas and you're 3 days of it and everyone's exhausted. You never know what will come out of people's mouths. But
Are
yeah,
they
I
gonna
mean,
have a villains land? I think they're making a villains land.
oh, they are? Well, that would be perfect.
Yeah,
People love the Disney villains.
yeah, people want to be for it to be a whole park, which I agree. But
Mm,
from my knowledge, because things are always thrown all over the place, like on the media. And I'm not within the company anymore, so I don't have like that inside,
right,
you
right.
know. But I'm pretty sure that's what's happening. Is that they're going to be making a villains lands, hopefully, unless
That'll
I
be
get
really
any
popular.
false. Yes, absolutely. And I guess that kind of works in a way. Yeah, it takes away from like the constant need to have the happiness. And
Right.
so I'm actually really curious because you're saying some things that actually excited me because when I worked at Disney, we literally like praised the Imagineers. Like we love you guys. We're just like they're so
Mhm,
cool.
mhm.
Like and so like I'm like, oh, I get to talk to one. This is so cool. You're like a celebrity to me. Wait, so question. So there was supposed to be something else, but not like the Pandora Avatar.
I don't know, I wasn't at the company then, so
Oh, I thought you said you were like something with fantasy.
I was at the Beastly Kingdom from 1990 to 94. It was on Animal Kingdom. Pandora and the Avatar ride came much later.
Oh
This
yeah.
this was when the park was first built, and so we didn't have any concept of that yet. But there would have been a dragon roller coaster ride, which would have been ahead of its time.
That is so I'm glad you're telling me this. That's so cool. I
Yeah,
can't
if
wait
you
to tell
look
all
up
my
Beastly
cast member friends.
Kingdom online, there's like all these fans who, and it's Beastly Lie Kingdom Dome. There's these like fans who know about it and write about it, and it's kind of funny.
That is so crazy. I've never heard of that.
There's so many rides and lands and attractions that were never built that are just sitting in the archives at Disney. It's pretty amazing.
I'm so intrigued. Like I'm
They're
so
amazing people, interesting, different, imaginative. They do all kinds of different design things. It is still the carny business though, and it's
yeah.
seasonal work, and people are always anxious about, will I be stay on, will I be fired? When's the next attraction?
So what did you like design? Like what is something that I'm like I know of that you were a part
Well,
of?
if you see, everything is, you'd have to go to Shanghai for that. I designed the
Ooh.
carousel there, the in fantasy, no, the Gardens of Adventure. It's a Fantasia themed carousel. I did all the character overlay, so all the horses, the little sculptures, the rounding boards, the carvings. I chose the palette. I arranged the horses. It was so much. It was my favorite project of my career.
That is so
This little
cool.
Fantasia carousel. They gave me a lot of leeway on that. And then I also designed all the princess themed architectural stuff for the new castle in Hong Kong Disneyland. So roof finials and stained glass and stone carvings, anything princess related. That was a lot of
So
fun too.
cool. That means I have to go there now.
Yeah. I would love to go to Shanghai. I did worked so much in that park, but I was independent contractor and I didn't end up going. So,
Well, you
but it's an
should.
amazing park. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I have
You
a
should
friend
be
in.
like, yeah, get it for free or something like that, or they should like, you should see what you design. Like that is such a
That's on my future. It's on my bucket list to go visit a friend in Beijing and go over to that Shanghai Park.
so cool. Did you design anything in like Walt Disney World?
No, because the park that I worked on in Animal Kingdom was not built, but
Yeah.
I've had works in the Disney Gallery store there. So I've done signing events. Oh, I did. I don't know if World of Disney store is still there. I did a bunch of
Yeah, it
murals for
is.
that, but that was a long time ago. I don't even know if the murals are still there. All the ceiling murals,
I think so.
like
Yeah.
the birds ceiling murals, all the traveling around the world ones in the main room.
I gotta look.
I don't
Yeah,
even
I know
remember
they
all
did
of.
like a whole they did a whole like a whole refurbishment, and they made
Yeah,
it like it looks so much bigger. But yeah, World of Disney is still like that's what it's called. It's still there in Disney Springs.
yeah, Disney
But
Springs.
yeah. So when I go in there, I have to like look for it.
Yeah, when you go in the gallery, ask if they have any Maggie Parr art. I haven't done any recently, so it's all print on demand now. Like their royalties, they only pay royalties for 5 years. So after that, they own
Really?
your work. Yeah,
No way.
yeah.
That's
I've tried
crazy.
negotiating. I've had lawyers try negotiating, and they will not change one single word in any contract.
Oh man, that stinks.
Yeah, so But it's all right. You just got to take the good with the bad and appreciate that you're working with this iconic company. And,
Mhm.
you know,
Well, if you ever come to Walt Disney World, like please let me know if you're doing like any
I will.
cool
I haven't in a while,
stuff.
but I used to quite a
Yeah.
bit.
Because if you do and you don't tell me, I'll be very offended.
Okay. I promise. I'll tell you, Justine. Okay.
Let's talk about your book. Tell us what it's about.
Okay. It's called A Creator's Guide to Stopping Self-Harm. And it's a guide to stopping cutting and self-harm through using creativity. As I said, I always encourage people to go to a therapist. I'm not a therapist, but I am a person who came through a 4-decade long struggle with it, with cutting and burning myself. First as a child, young child, then as a teenager, then a different phase in my 20s, and then a very serious relapse in my mid 40s, where I ended up with second degree burns in a clinic, seeking help, not knowing what was wrong with me. But I found a great therapist. I utilized a lot of the new modalities, trauma therapy, somatic experiencing, working with different parts inside. And I used creativity to dig my way out of it and to build relationships with the parts of me inside that were trying to express something. And then last year, I started writing this book. That was the final. I've been free of urges for about, let me see, maybe 8 years, almost 10 years. Now I've been finally ready to talk about it and to share with others. And writing this book put it all in perspective for me. I did a lot of research for it. I learned a lot. And it just being able to share it with others and have people text me and ask for advice or tell me that they've gone a day without cutting, or, just giving people hope is really why I wrote this book. If I can help one person stop cutting, it's been worth it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You changed their life, and that is a beautiful, beautiful thing.
I also created a website to go with it called stoppingselfharm.com.
Hmm.
That talks about the book and exercises from the book, and we'll have a online course to go with that.
Okay.
So it's a different
Nice.
way to take in the information. Not everyone likes to read.
True. Yeah, everyone has a different way of learning. Some are visual, some are doing, some are
Right.
reading, some are listening.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. I definitely check that out. So, I am of course going to put all your information in the
Thank
show
you.
notes so people can go ahead and check you out. But I do want to thank you so much for taking your time to come on here, tell your story, and chatting with me, and also give me like just for me personally, my selfishness, giving me like a little talk about Imagineering.
Yeah.
That's like a little
That's
treat to
always
me. So
fun.
I'm just saying thank you to you for that.
Thank you for having me, Justine. It's been so fun. And I really appreciate that millennials/Gen Zs like you are having these conversations, figuring out stuff that we didn't know about growing up, and taking it the next step and helping other people of your generation and younger. I mean, that's great. You guys are so much farther ahead than we were in my generation. And that's reassuring for the future.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, for everyone who's listening, I hope you guys have a good rest of your day and stay tuned for the next episode.